Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction Tapes. We are doing a new theme for the month of March, which is characters. Today's focus will be protagonists. I am joined by
Dylan, hello, I'm back again. Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm Badger. Lovely to be here.
And I am our producer, Ian.
All right. Well, to start things off, I think it might be good to mention what exactly is a protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, a protagonist is the main character of a work. That's about it.
Solid
Yeah.
explanation.
Well, I mean, for me, a protagonist kind of has to, like, if we're just talking about definitions, and like, I think everyone has a personal definition, but for me, it's a protagonist is someone who achieves two aims in a work, like two basic general goals. The first being the person who drives the narrative forward, in terms of like we follow their journey, and the second is evoking sympathy from an audience, which is why we can play around with like heroes and villains and whatnot. So like that's kind of how I define them when I sit down to write or read something. It's just like, who do I care about? And it's like, oh, this person. And they could be a piece of crap, but if they evoke sympathy from me and drive the plot forward, they're kind of the protagonist role, in to me anyway.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. Badger probably puts it better than I would have put it. And also brings up one of the things I wanted to talk about is protagonist and antagonist versus hero and villain, because something that you see a lot, especially with folks who are less familiar with writing or newer to the I don't want to say trade, but the hobby, the practice, is that there's a conflation between protagonist and hero and a conflation between antagonist and villain.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of like a casualty of the like very like I think there's a tendency, especially with like written works, and especially in like fandom, where like protagonists, there's like a bit of hero worship going on, and like folks focus on the protagonist they can relate to. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're like the good person in the story. Like classic examples of this, I think, from popular culture is like Breaking Bad. Like Walter White is not a good person. He is not someone that you that is like upstanding in any way. He's not someone who treats anyone fairly or with any like sort of like kindness. But when he's trapped in a van and police are knocking at his door, you're rooting for him to get out of that situation, right? Like he's awful and he's a jerk, but still the audience is like, man, I hope Walter gets out of this one. Like, so it's you can definitely have protagonists that have villainous motivations, and I think a lot of that has a lot to do with like how villains drive the plot a little bit more. Like villain protagonists, I think, have become really, really popular lately, especially as works have evolved and we've started to explore different kinds of avenues of writing and scripting and media. Where because villains are inherently interesting in the sense that like they're usually proactive. Like a hero's reacting to what a villain does, usually, right? Like most fantasy stories are like, oh man, I sure hope that orc army that's attacking doesn't win, and then it's up to the heroes to stop it. It's like the villain's proaction like sparks a reaction from the hero, and like because the villain's doing a bad thing. So sometimes it's like more interesting inherently to be like, what's this villain guy up to? Seems like he's like, you know, a mover and a shaker and interesting.
Yeah, I am personally a big fan of villain protagonists. There is a series of original works on AO3 and Tumblr called Sinoverse, that has a villain protagonist that's done very, very well. It's also generally queer and great. On top of, all the other things about it that I like, it's also got a villain protagonist that is done very well. They're not a great person, but they're the person and that narrative that I care the most about.
Yeah, that's the key. Like, who you give a crap about is such a hard thing to define. Like, it's easier for the audience, but like I think it's a lot harder from like a writer's perspective, being like, okay, this person's going to do 7 out of the 10 Geneva Convention crimes or whatever, and the goal is to make you like them. And then like, but the A to B, like what happens in the middle there, is so crucial. And there is a lot of folks who won't share that sentiment, right? Like, there are people who are hard coded in terms of moral, their like personal moral code when they approach a work, that like I have people in my life who couldn't finish The Wire or The Sopranos or like original works, because they're like, he just did too many, like the main character did too many bad things. And it's like, yeah, that's totally fair. But the trick of like, I care a lot about this person is like so magic. It's so hard to pull off.
I think there's something similar to that with, I haven't read this myself, but several of my friends are big, I was going to say War Thunder. Not War Thunder. Although some of my friends, unfortunately for them, do play that game.
War Thunder
Warhammer.
PvP enjoyers. Yeah, Warhammer. Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
Warhammer's a huge example of it.
And with Gaunt's Ghosts, in terms of being like an example of good writing, where the characters kind of have to do terrible shit all the time.
Well, that's also just like, that's the universe kind of asks it.
That's Warhammer.
Yeah, like, so that's another thing that's like really important. Like, because if you're talking hero versus villain, and I apologize for how much I'm going to talk about this, because hero versus villain is something, since I started writing as a hobby, has always been like a discourse thing in every writing community I've been in.
Right.
Aside from the Arcane fandom, which is like pretty, actually a little bit there too, but we can cycle around on that. But so the question of hero versus villain is always like, hey, what is the universe asking? Right? Because like in Warhammer, for example, which is a great example, war is happening constantly, which means like wholesale slaughter of people is constantly ongoing. Every single space is designed with the like optics of, this will be a cool terrain to fight on, like constantly. So when you talk about someone who's like, I've slain 10,000 men, it's like, right, that's a Tuesday in Warhammer. Like, meanwhile, if you go over to like, say, Dresden Files, like, I've slain 10,000 men, like that's a serious like villain in that universe. Like, that's like, what the hell? Like, that's crazy because of the what the universe demands of the characters. And like, so sitting down to be like, I want a protagonist or I want an antagonist, like the rules of the universe are like the step 0, basically. Like, what kind of story is this? And that's like the first, that's why like world building and buy-in is so important from readers. Like, you have to know, like, here are the defined rules of my universe, and get people to buy in to what you're selling, essentially, of like, so welcome to my world where everyone is a snake. But this person is not a snake, he's a raccoon, and that he's a bad guy for that. And then the audience has to be like, got it. Snake's good, raccoon's bad, let's go. And that has to be like the pillar that the hero versus antagonist thing needs to be built on, or hero versus villain, excuse me.
Yeah, I think some of that comes up with superhero works, with comics and with novels kind of set with a superhero setting, which honestly, I find it more interesting to have villain protagonists and hero antagonists for superhero settings, because then you are seeing someone who's challenging the status quo.
Yes.
That's going to be someone who I'm going to just flat out care about more in general, on a personal level, but you don't have that. One of the weaknesses for me of superhero media is you have your heroes who can do these incredible, tremendous things, and they're enforcing the status quo.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. Like Lord of the Rings, for instance, right? So you have these you have the wizards. I'm actually super unlearned. I am not learned at all about Lord of the Rings, so if anyone here is, please correct me on this because I don't know all the terminology. But you
Don't
have
worry,
like
I'm here to fact check you.
fantastic. Ian, what are the like Gandalf the Grey is a what? He's a-
Maiar, I believe.
Istari.
Oh,
Well, okay,
no,
so
I'm
there's.
wrong.
You're not entirely wrong there, Maya.
I love this. I love the
All
well.
right.
Okay, so there's. I love that phrase. Eliciting that phrase anytime. All right, continue.
All right, so the Istari is the Elven word for wizards. So
Okay.
he's one of the 5 Istari, but he's also not human. His species is Maiar, which is a lesser divinity in the cosmology of Lord of the Rings.
Right. So the reason like those are all powerful beings. Those are beings that can do whatever. They come and go as they please, right? Famously in the text.
More or less, yeah.
The reason why Saruman is a villain in that universe, and the reason why he's intriguing is that he has objectively taken a side, and his side is against the heroes, right? So you have Gandalf and you have Saruman, and you have the flipping between the two of them, and like they mirror each other. And it's there's a certain kind of like status quo pushing that a villain protagonist is able to do. And like establishing the status quo is like there are these all powerful beings, and each of them can influence the world in very specific ways. But if one of them doesn't step up, that becomes the villainy in some ways. Like Saruman's interested in keeping the status quo, which makes him a villain. And the status quo being, LOL, orcs are coming. Another really like good example of like villain protagonists that are like changing things are like what's it called? I don't actually know what the universe is, but like the Hunger Games. Is there a name for that universe, or is it just the Hunger Games?
Everybody,
I just think it's the
everybody-
Hunger Games, yeah.
Yeah, everybody just knows it as the Hunger Games. I do know that the country that it is that. The name of the country in the Hunger Games is Pan Am.
Pan Am. That's
Yeah.
such a okay. Pan Am, man. Pan Am as a name is winning lately. Cyberpunk 2077. Anyway, so with Pan Am, but yeah,
Or
like
sorry.
the Hunger Games.
No, sorry, I slightly mispronounced that. It's Pan Am.
Pan Am. Okay.
Panem.
Right on. But yeah, for the Hunger Games stuff, the reason why I think folks lost a little bit of like I know I've talked to a few people who are like Katniss lost me by the end of it. Because eventually Hunger Games devolved into like this like war criminal thing where it's like, all right, so now like massive innocents are getting slaughtered and you have the bomb dropped on a bunch of like medics, and as the series progressed it started to go way more and more into like the horrors of war. But like that's where Katniss started getting interesting to me, is the third book. Because before that it was sort of like cookie cutter kind of like person who's really, really good at one thing. But
Right.
when she started dipping more into the at any cost kind of mentality, that's when it was like like you're not the cut and dry hero. And that's so much more intriguing than like I'm doing this for the good of all. Like for the good of all, if you think about it, is a terrible motivation because it implies that you have a view of what good is, firstly. And secondly is like, who says you're the person to do that? Like it implies a self.
It implies a lot of ego.
Yeah, super, right? Like super. It's like the sort of thing of like anyone you know who wants to be president has to be an egomaniac. Like it's that sort of like thing where it's like you think you're the
Yeah.
best person for this job, you must be
I mean,
some sort of
Kind of bringing it back around to Lord of the Rings. That's also kind of the villainous drive of Sauron.
yeah.
He's also a Maiar, and he goes down to Middle Earth and looks around and says, "This is all really inefficient. I could do it better."
Yeah, exactly. And like, so that's that sort of motivation of like, this sucks, let's change it. I think, well, first of all, for obvious reasons, that is like that resonates with a lot of us right now.
Gee, I
But
wonder
like,
why.
yeah, but like more specifically, like that's why villain protagonists whip. And when I say villain, I do mean like as previously established, like villain in terms of your universe, whatever the universe is. Um, that's why they whip, because they're like, yeah, I'm doing this for reasons that are way more personal than, well, you're hurting people, so like it's like, why do you care about that is a really important question to ask in terms of a character thing. Like, why are you doing this? And if the answer is because it's the right thing to do, I'm a little less interested. But if it's because I have deep trauma, that's way more interesting. And sometimes deep trauma means that you don't react to things in a heroic way.
I think related to this, actually, an antagonist, Luke from Percy Jackson.
Walk me through it.
Okay.
Mike. Yeah, give it to me. Sing it to me.
Are you familiar with it at all?
Percy Jackson? I can tell you that because I went to film school, I've been getting Percy Jackson and Peter Jackson confused my entire life. So when we say Percy Jackson, we're talking about like the Gods Young YA series?
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, roll with it. I know what we're talking about now.
Okay, well, Luke is deeply traumatized. His mom goes insane when he's fairly young.
Tough life.
His dad, Hermes, is absent father. And he takes a look at the system that he lives in, goes, this sucks. I don't like it. And does terrible, awful things to change the system. And he almost pulls in one of the protagonists for the series, Annabeth, by tempting her with you're smart enough to think that you could do better, that you could design a better system than what exists for us already.
Yeah, I really dig that. Like, so for me personally, like talking about like writing stuff from like as a amateur writer, the villain protagonist is something I've never really attempted, but I love seeing it, and I love seeing villains with good motivation. Like that Percy Jackson example just being like the exact sort of thing that I'm looking for in media. Because I think what attracts people a lot to media is human stories more than like for the good of all stories.
I should be clear, Luke is not a protagonist. He's just he kind of has those themes.
No, absolutely. But I think that the struggle of like two real people, like a real hero and a real villain, or a real protagonist and a real antagonist, and real in the sense of like relatable. I think that's so much more attractive to an audience, because like, first of all, you get the whole triumph over like invested in the struggle. But right. Also like it tickles the analytical brain, and I think that's what a lot of people like, is just like, let's talk about why they did what they did. Like Joel from The Last of Us. That's another example of like a protagonist that I don't think I don't think he fits the bill 100% as villain protagonist, because we're clearly on his side. But Joel, this is spoilers for the video game. I haven't watched a ton of the show yet. But Joel does a thing near the end of the game that by the rules of the universe is not okay. Like, it is explicitly not okay what he does. The reasons why he does it are super, super sympathetic. Like, you learn throughout the entire game why he makes the decisions he does, but like, it's still like not okay by the end of it. And like, people flipped on the character. And I think you're supposed to ask a lot of questions about like, oh man, like, did he have enough information to make that call? Was that a call that was his to make, is a big one. And we see the effects of it in the second game, where like the answer was no, it wasn't his call. He didn't have enough information, and it sucked for a lot of people. But like, at the end of the day, like, I still care about Joel. Like, I care about what he does, and it's awful what happens to him down the line. and like that's the sort of thing that like I'm really invested in, where it's just like, if you can make me do that, if you can make me really really like a character and then make me go, oh, like the like disappointed oh at the end, like I felt like his father, where I was just kind of like, I'm not mad, I'm just super disappointed that you've made this decision.
Badger, remind me, how much of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives have you read?
0. He shares a very similar name to me, and I take that very personally.
There is something that by those terms you will love in the Stormlight Archives. Actually, also in Mistborn.
He is amazing. Like, just not to make this like Brandon Sanderson gush hour. Like, I don't, and I'm also not talking about the man, more like the author. Is like, his writing speed is
It's
like,
insane.
It's like an elevated being. Like, it's truly like, whoa. Yeah, nutty. Truly nutty.
Yeah, Brandon Sanderson Gush Hour is scheduled for the end of April, by the way.
Oh, fantastic. I'll have to, I mean, I don't think I'll read one of his by then, but I'll have to bone up a little bit more to appreciate April a little bit better.
So just as someone who comes from a different school of, novel, big George R. R. Martin fan, I think that along the same lines as Joel, there is
God, yes,
Tyrion Lannister.
Mm-hmm.
Now, show Tyrion Lannister is a terrible character. Because
sorry, I am laughing because I agree with you. To be clear, I just wasn't expecting it. All right,
yeah,
continue.
It's completely true. His entire purpose ends after 4 seasons, and he's just along for the ride.
And to take
he's there to make shirts. Yeah. But the great thing about Tyrion is, from the start of book 2, even stuff in book 1, he's a terrible person, and you realize that. But you don't like the other people around him more. So, and he does a few nice things. But the problem is that you realize, if you look more into it, these nice things are just to make himself feel good and feel superior to the people around him. And then eventually, he goes off the deep end, and he's a terrible person. And he convinces other people to do terrible things for the sake of his revenge on his family.
Yeah.
That he hates.
Go on, continue.
And
you're cooking.
And the great thing is, you also have his brother, Jaime Lannister, who's the complete opposite, who you start out hating, and over time, through his story, you begin to like a lot more and sympathize with what he has to go through and the situation he was faced in. And I just think that's the brilliant of writing, but Tyrion especially, after book 3 and going into A Dance with Dragons, that book, he does everything pretty much
I
wrong.
love that you brought it up too, because like, so when we're talking about villain protagonists versus hero protagonists, and I think we've given a lot of love to villain protagonists here throughout this, but Jaime Lannister specifically is a great example of like context and what, like, so as Dylan alluded to, like, Jaime is a character who you loathe, like despise. His first act is to cripple a child. So it's sort of like, oh, all right, so we're starting from a pretty high bar here. But like, he is someone you loathe, who the characters in the story loathe, who the character POVs we see loathe him for decisions he's made. And then by the time you get deeper into his story, you realize the context for the decisions he made them in are outright heroic. Like, they are not black and white. They're like, he did this literally because something awful was about to happen. And that made everyone hate him. And he just kind of wears that. Like, a lot of his outward persona is leaning into this character that everyone hates. Like, because it's kind of like, yeah, all right, whatever. If you're going to revile me for my finest act, I'm just going to act like a dick all the time. And then he slowly starts to cure that that mentality. Also, Jamie is also terrible in the show. Like, man, both Lannister brothers really tanked in the show version of that story. Like, ugh.
Dylan, remind me. I remember the show better than the books at this point. But back in the first season, when they still actually had book to write, that they were still hewing pretty close to the book, did Tyrion have that whole "wear it like armor and it can't be used against you" line?
Yes, that's I know that's in the show. I haven't read Game of Thrones in a long time, but likely, yeah. But he has a lot of Tyrion says a lot of things. Tyrion has the most chapters of any character, so remember every Tyrion quote. Very difficult. But what I will say, both characters, they're brothers, so it's and you can also see like there's only like one sort of period of time, and there's a very small period in book 3 where you see the two of them together before they branch out, and so their arcs cross at a moment, and it's because Jamie finally tells Tyrion a very important piece of information, and that information is what pushes Tyrion down his bad road. Well, Jamie feels the consequences of telling Tyrion that, but also pretty much over the next, book tries to make himself a better person.
And also, just to answer that question real quick, yes, it is said in the book. It's like a Jon chapter where Tyrion's like, wear it like armor, or armor yourself in it. They changed the quote slightly. Sorry, Dylan, continue.
Yeah, and just, I think Ice and Fire is like a perfect story to look at things within the context of you have to make a chart, of who is actually presented as a good person and is a good person, and I think Jon is probably the best person who is presented as a good person. But then you have characters like Victorian, who's a big idiot and a terrible person, but you love him because he's entertaining. And I just feel like a lot of those characters and their stories, characters like Catelyn's a decent person, but then you get to after book 3 and what she becomes, that's frightening. Arya, this little girl who's had a terrible thing after terrible thing happen to her, it becomes a killer obsessed with revenge, And these are characters who are presented as the protagonists in their story, but they're terrible people and doing terrible things.
Yeah.
I think Game of Thrones, the TV show, tried to do, sort of the Daenerys story, but it's once again, completely terrible, awful, stinky.
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental disconnect between what the books are doing and what the show tried to do. In that the Song of Ice and Fire book series is, if you look at it from like the point of view of characters, there's multiple stories and multiple protagonists, and because of that, some of those protagonists end up being the antagonists of other stories that are still within this sort of meta story of Westeros.
Right.
But that type of storytelling doesn't translate well to primetime television, where there's a lot of incentive to have a story about a sort of classical hero. And that's how you end up with the story of Jon and Daenerys by season 8.
Yeah, I think I think the show's biggest problem is that it didn't respect its audience's intelligence very much. Because I think there's a great way of doing exactly that, Ian. But you have to be really careful with how it's written. and you have to trust that your audience is just going to get it. And I don't think that either of those things were done by like season 5. It's out the window. It's off the rails. Like I think 4, it starts to get shaky. And then by 5, it's like, well, the roller coaster's in the air. We are screwed.
Yeah. This is also, I think, an excellent segue point talking about having multiple protagonists and kind of some of what that's called. One of the shows recently, air quotes, that took my mind by storm was Arcane, which is an adaptation of League of Legends. It had no right to be this good.
No, it really didn't.
Should I check it out? I've heard a lot of good things.
Oh,
Okay, you don't need to know anything about League of Legends. I've never played League of Legends. I know nothing about League of Legends lore. Arcane is gorgeous and a great story. Go watch it.
Hell yeah. Goddamn right it is. Oh man. The Arcane is one of those things that like as soon as it like seeps into your brain, like it like takes up all the crevices of it, and just like for a period of time, depending on how I mean, in my experience, how neurodivergent you are, it could possess your brain for like up to a year afterwards.
I think we're well past a year at this point.
Yeah, well past.
Maya still has Kate Vi rotating rapidly in her brain.
So
yes,
I do have to confess that was a joke because I'm almost done like a 230,000 word fanfic about Arcane. Well, about hockey. What if hockey? So
okay, that may have been a joke. I forgot that you have written a lot in the Arcane fan fiction. My response was serious. To be clear, anyone out there listening to us who has not seen Arcane, go watch
Mom.
it. Yeah, it rules. Arcane. Oh my god! So the thing that Arcane does so well, I think, is juggling a cast of like 15 plus, and
Something
of those,
like that,
of those, there's probably like 6 or 7 that you could label at any one point as like the main protagonist of a moment. Like it breaks itself up into like 6 or 7 minute sequences, and each one is like, this is who the main character is here. I've heard the argument that you can actually like especially the third act does this a lot, where it goes like Jace to Caitlyn to Vi to Jinx at certain points. Silco gets a big moment in the third act. Then you have like Mel, and you have Victor, and you have all these characters that it like flips between rapidly. Echo, and all of them have their own point of view on the world. The universe's rules are established super early, and then it's like go. And they really were super invested in telling this multiple point of view story. And what I love so much about it is that you can come away from it with a lot of thoughts. Like there are folks who are
Many
like
thoughts.
Yeah, like there are folks who are like Jace is terrible. Which, you know, respect to anyone who dislikes Jace. I understand the reasons why. For me personally, he didn't get interesting until he looked at Silco and said, we both have our shitty roles to play. That was the moment where I was like, ooh, I'm in. This guy actually like won this encounter with Silco, but he didn't even barter. But like, yeah, like there's this whole like ecosystem of like who I care about flips so rapidly. And it's the sort of thing where you can just study it in a lab, like spread its ribs open and be like, what have you done here to me specifically?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is very well done. The character writing, for folks who are starting out writing and you want to, character writing is something you wanted to look at Arcane, because the characters in Arcane feel very real, and they stick in your head forever. And if that's something you want to do, I would advise at least watching Arcane. If not, trying to break down what it does for yourself and understand some of the choices they make.
They do so much showing without telling. Like, they really do. I think one of the key examples, like the thing that I keyed in on, the moment where I was like, I got to write something about this, is midway through the second act. There's a character who has a item that defines her. The show goes through great lengths to establish what this item means to her. She brags about it. She is shown to be very, very effective when using it. And it's sort of like it's constantly there. This threat of her, the character's like power, comes from this item. And there's a point where the show, the storyline goes, someone you care about is hurt. You need to trade this item for her. She has one option. They don't even say it that way. They're just like, yeah, I need something for trade. I need money or something. She has one item of value, and it's this item. So she trades it. And in that moment, the show tells you how much she cares about this person, which is a lot. What this means to her personally to give this up. And like all the show, and the show communicates this in 3 seconds. She takes it off, she looks at it, and then she hands it over. And it's this, that was the moment where I was like, I got to go. Right. I got to go to a laptop or something. And like, it is so powerful to how much a glance can do. But anyways, as an aside, that's not, we're not doing a character study on Arcade as much as I could talk about it. When it comes to protagonists and multiple POVs, I've found the best way of going into it is what I like to call pillar work. It's really, really important in running multiple NPCs in a D&D game too, which is like something that I like to do. And basically you build pillars and say, this character has this thing. Like this character is really, really into crabs. Everything they do is to increase the crab's political power. And this other person, they're really into making swords. And the sword thing is like every conversation they're in, they're thinking about how to steer it back to swords. And so what I like to do with these pillars is I like to say like, it's like a three-step flow chart. Like, can I get the conversation back to swords is one. 2 would be like, I really hope my dad is proud of me. And the third one can be like a vague, like general thing of like, I really don't trust boats. And like those 3 things, you can just carry those through the story and you'll be surprised by how much the story wraps around to them. Every sequence you write with them can be an opportunity to reinforce or reestablish the pillars of what makes up their personality. And as you write something, as you write the universe and establish the rules of the universe, you can always go back to them and edit them and change them as they get more or less screen time, quote unquote, which is like the thing about writing that I think gets lost. And when folks ask for advice on it, it's really tough to advise in terms of character work because you just got to spend time with them. And having multiple ones and having like equal screen time, you're never going to quite get there, in my opinion. Like, as Dylan mentioned way back, like Tyrion has far and away the most chapters in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is still a very, very in-depth and big multi-POV kind of sequence. But like, there are going to be characters that a writer likes more, writes less, and that's okay. Don't limit yourself to dividing chapters equally. Don't limit yourself to like, I haven't had an X scene in a while. If you want to write that scene with this person as a POV person, do it. If it feels right, do it. But for the most part, like you've got to kind of like feel it out, feel what feels right for you, what feels right for the story, what feels right for the mission statement, and then push into it. If you want to write a multi-POV story, multiple protagonist story.
Kind of related to something you said with character writing is spending time with the characters, and that's how you kind of get better with it. Which I don't do a lot of original writing. Almost everything I do with blurbos that have been spinning in my brain for at least a few months, if not several years at that point. With D&D, kind of is my most experience with this, I usually have to play a character for 5 to 6 sessions before I even have a complete idea of some of their character parts. Like, I'll mechanically know how they work, you know, I'll know what class I want to play, I'll know what abilities I want to play, but I don't know who they are, necessarily. I usually go into D&D games with a fairly minimal backstory, because I don't know them yet. And then when I spend a little bit more time with them, I discover, oh, this person's... They might have, like, skills at being people person, but they're too lazy to ever actually people.
Right. Right. Like, as like a side note of that, like, same thing with, like, so, all right, I think what I'm most known for at this point is Run of the Cup, which is, like, my big
Probably.
arcane fanfic thing. And since it's wrapping, I've gotten a lot of questions about, like, how to do the multi-character thing. And my delete key is my best friend in a lot of ways like that, because, like, there are so many sequences that you just sit down and you just write, and, like, the sequence could be awful. Like, the writing bit, the paragraph could be terrible. And I always akin those things, because obviously they don't make the cut, they get deleted. But it's sort of like practicing your character voice in your shower before a session. Like, it's like you're trying to work out how they talk, how they move, how they interact with specific people. Like, the amount of times I've figured out at the table how a core character trait, because another player said something to me and I had a reaction in the moment of, like, whatever, I don't understand how the word procreation, say, for instance. So the character was like, I don't know what that is. Is that like when a professional makes a sword? And having the other character have to explain it to you, and you just be like, this is who this character is. They're incredibly stupid, but only when it comes to words that are more than 2 syllables. So making those rules for yourself at a D&D table is the same sort of thing with writing, in that, like, you find out those rules for writing the characters as they live in your world. In terms of perspective switches, I know that a lot of people like to get cute with it, in terms of, like, this character will never say this word or doesn't use contractions or whatever. And I think that really helps too. Like, I think it's like a beginner step in terms of, like, this person says ain't instead of is not, is a really good way of, like, a character voice in D&D, or like a physical object that a lot of people use to get into character. Like, a friend of mine, when they're playing their character, they always act like they have a cigarette in their fingers to get into character. Like, props really, really work well. But, like, choosing a language style is a really, really quick and efficient way of being like, I'm in this person's head. It's like a trigger where you just like, haha, I am here. I'm writing Jace or whatever. But yeah, the original character ticks are so much fun to talk about. Like, the idea of, like, sitting at a table with a bunch of improv artists and being like, I've decided that my character is terrified of birds, and your character has an owl, and that's going to be the basis of our interaction for the next 6 hours.
I find it really funny, Badger, how for parts of the D&D game that I've started running, you've just seen parts of it without having any idea of what's going on. There's been a few things in this conversation where you've just mentioned something that happened in game.
Like, what's hilarious is that, like, I actually don't have any idea, and that's just real basic, like, D&D stuff. Like, I used to run public tables for a while, and the bird scenario specifically is, like, I was alarmed. It was one of those things where it's like, if I had a nickel for every time a character mentioned that they were afraid of birds, I'd have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened 3 times across 3 different tables. It's like, what is happening? And, like, specific examples, like, oh, they can drill into your brain. It's like, is this on Twitter? Where are you guys getting this from? Oh, man.
Oh, yeah, I have one of my characters that I play is a barbarian. She's suspicious, not entirely bright.
Classic.
And she is afraid of elves. She thinks elves can see inside her brain. That's why I mentioned it. And we have, like, I think 2 half-elves in the party for that game.
So they can only read, like, surface thoughts? How does that happen? How does that work?
Oh, she just refuses to look them in the eye. She's entirely wrong.
That's amazing.
But, well, okay, she only refuses to look one of them in the eye. The other one, she's known for a long time, and she only won't look him in the eye when she's scared, because she's ashamed of her thoughts. She doesn't want to be seen kind of as weak. And it's been really fun with that game to work out, okay, I have to, I'm not looking at anyone right now because I'm scared shitless.
Yeah, like it's amazingly applicable. Like a couple of characters in the piece I'm writing now, like I've decided like one of them, the entirety of their character is they eat a sandwich before every game. That is the entirety of their character. Like that's the bedrock on which the pillar on which they're founded. It's like, what kind of person would eat a really messy, disgusting hoagie before every professional game? And then and just like here is the entirety of the of their character based around this one thing. The other one is like a character that sings to themselves under their breath during high stakes moments. Like, what does that character look like? Are they unhinged? That sort of thing. So yes, doing multiple POVs, writing protagonists is so dependent on like a creative process that like just resolves itself when you spend time with them. When you spend time writing scenes, they could be garbage scenes about adopting dogs that will never make it to the work, or they could be like the most intense emotional scenes that push that work forwards. Either way, you just got to put the work in. Like there's no shortcut, unfortunately, to writing a good protagonist, especially if you're switching multiple POVs. You just gotta sit with them for a while. Gotta see how they feel about certain things.
The technique that I'm a fan of to getting character will always be just making a playlist and listening to 15 of those songs.
Yeah, big time.
Oh yeah, I have playlists for certain stuff I write where it could be totally unrelated to the actual vibes of the work, but I'm gonna listen to Dagoth Wave 15 times to write this section.
Yep. Yeah. Action sequences work too. I'll hold that for if there's ever an action sequence episode. I'd love to be on that. But the music to motivate is so crucial. Character playlists are very, very popular. I really subscribe to that. For me, like a trick I always use too is like writing a sentence that describes the current mental state, like having that be the opener to your scene. And again, it doesn't have to stay in. Like that never has to stay into your work. Like that's just for you. Like, hey, it's really embarrassing when this thing happens, and then that sets the entirety of the emotional spectrum for that character, and also lets the audience know, hey, we're in someone else's head right now. And both of those are really, really important to flip back and forth. And yeah.
All right, we kind of jumped the gun a little bit by going into advice for writing protagonists.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, it's great. It's content is content. And so now I guess I'd kind of like to shift topic a little bit into protagonists that we like, stuff we enjoy, stuff we think is done well, which aren't necessarily always the same thing.
I'll start us ranting on this. The protagonists I like are the three Xenoblade ones. So yeah, that's all I got to say. No more statement. I like my boys who have a hobby and go and save the world with the magical sword that, in the second cases, also is a girl.
I love that. I'll tell you a character that I love to hate, which I think is sort of what we're talking about. Like a protagonist that we love to hate is I'm blanking on the guy's name right now, but I'm going to describe it. He's from Vermintide.
Ooh, I've played that game.
Yeah. Victor Saltzmeyer. So Victor is a character who is super into his emperor, believes he is a god, which I believe most Warhammer universe folks do. And everything he says and does is started with the phrase "Blessed Sigmar," and I loathe him, but I love him at the same time. He is not a good person. He's awful. He's pious. He is rude. He's super, super judgmental of people, and he's written so consistently that you can't help but enjoy his presence. And it's done with like, it's specifically interesting because it's done only in like prompts, like when your character heals itself, he says this, which is like really, really good ways of like conveying a character very, very quickly. So that's my shout out for this one, like in terms of protagonists that I think are really, really well done. But I wouldn't ever interact with the human ever. But I think he's really, really well done.
Yeah, a big one for me, this is going to come to no shocker to Ian, Dylan, and anyone else who's listened to more than one episode, Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files.
What?
Oh, you read
He
Dresden
is-
too?
What is he dressed in? Sorry, who are we talking about? No,
And
go
in
on,
this
go on.
case, Harry is genuinely... He's generally a pretty good person. He's made some bad calls. But I would say he's made them mostly for the right reasons. And he's just fun for me. He's snarky to power, which I love. I love that. And he's fun and nerdy. I'm pretty basic on what I will enjoy, and Dresden ticks a lot of those boxes for me.
Fun and nerdy is so
Mhm.
key. Yeah.
And speaking of snarky, I think and also speaking of multiple protagonists, I think my favorite of, and I'm going to carbon date myself here, my favorite Animorphs protagonist.
Oh, let's
was
go.
Yeah. Animorphs, yeah.
Oh, let's
Marco.
go. Yeah,
Marco.
baby. I was hoping you'd say Marco. Let's go. I love Animorphs. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so first off, pick the gorilla as the battle morph. Best animal. Yes, don't at me.
Strongest animal. Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, yep. Has opposable thumbs. Anyways, but yeah, the way that he is snarky in the face of danger, but also I currently am using a paraphrase of his quote, his definition of ruthlessness. That is something that has been stuck in my brain for 20 plus years now. Ruthlessness isn't about cruelty, it's about seeing the bright, clear line that leads from point A to point B and not caring about anything but the perfect beauty of it.
Yeah.
That is... Wow, that is a hell of a quote.
Also, I love the fact that, like, this is just Marco in general, but I love the fact that of everyone's battle morphs, he's like, nah, man, I got to use doors. That's important to me. Like, just like the fact that he's like snarky and like devil may care on the surface, but also he has bangers like that and has like the most efficient battle morph says a lot about his character while saying nothing at all. And like that, yeah, he's just so well done. I was gonna say Axe is also a very, very high favorite of mine too from the same series.
Oh,
like,
Axe is excellent. I think.
yeah,
I mean, I would say that my second favorite is actually Rachel.
Rachel's a great pick.
Yeah, she comes at the idea of doors from a different direction.
I can
Marco.
still open them. Just, there will be no
Can't
door
close
when I'm
them
done.
afterwards. But...
Exactly. It doesn't function as a door. It's more of a way at that point.
Yeah, Axe. Axe
for
is an
me-
excellent character.
Yeah, for me, it's
well.
like the way that the series has its flaws. Don't get me wrong, but the way that they convey Axe's character as like just little things like he doesn't understand how like store shelves work. Like he doesn't get it, and like there's little punctuations of like, oh, this creature is an alien. Like this is not someone who understands human interaction on any level. Doesn't communicate with his mouth. So it's
there's lots of moments of that. Some of which are small and subtle, and some of which are not.
The
way like his species naturally doesn't have mouths. They communicate telepathically. So whenever he's in human morph and speaks, he's got these constant tics where he just gets obsessed with playing with the sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's like less subtle than some of his stuff, like when he accidentally starts talking about like advanced theoretical physics, but it's more subtle than how obsessed he gets with the sense of taste. And like they literally have to drag him away from eating cigarette butts.
There's a great moment. It's actually in the Andalite Chronicles. It's not in the main series, but the great moment of the Andalites in general, which is Axis species, that really like solidified them is when two human characters take off their shoes and the Andalites are horrified because they have hooves. They've never seen.
Thinks she's about to rip off her hoofs.
Yeah, rip off her feet. He's like, "What are you doing? Stop it!" Yeah, like that sort of stuff is just the best part of protagonists like writing. Just like, I'm about to tell you something core to their personality, and it's on you to notice it. Like we talked a little bit about. I think this is actually off recording. It might have been on recording. I don't remember. But respecting your audience. Stepping on advice for writing protagonists again a little bit. Sorry. But respect that your audience is going to get it, because in my experience, it's so rewarding for people to figure it out, and the people who don't figure it out don't matter. And what I mean by that is foreshadow, put little nuggets, bury your gold, like legitimately bury your gold, because digging up treasure is fun for an audience. So bury your gold as everywhere and let them dig it up. Let them come to you with the work. There is no character tick that is too subtle, in the sense that if you're conveying it and you believe it's true, then don't spell it out for people. Like, have characters avoid drinking. Like Grand Theft Auto 4 had a great character tick where Nico, the main character, just subtly turned down alcohol every cutscene. Like, someone would offer him a beer, he'd just kind of say, no, thanks. Did it matter in the core story? No, it didn't matter at all that he was. But like, every answer to the question of why he's doing that made him more interesting as a character. Is he sober? Does he always want to be on his A game because every cutscene is about business to him? Like, there are all these reasons that the audience can fill in the blank for, and that's not something that 60% of the player base will notice. But it doesn't matter, because the people who do notice it treasure it. They like cherish it. And like, when you're writing a protagonist, fill it with that stuff. Don't explain yourself all the time. Just be like, this person opens doors with their left hand and the left hand only. And the people who will notice that will be like, why? And that becomes a moment, a watershed moment, where they like understand the character a little bit better. Sorry. Anyway.
Speaking of burying your gold, and with respect to telling stories with protagonists, Brandon Sanderson and Tamsin Muir, people we talk about a lot on this show because we are very normal.
Very.
Both do this to phenomenal degrees. Gideon, the main character of Gideon the Ninth, arguably the main character, the perspective character.
She is the main protagonist, Gideon the Ninth, for sure. Yes.
She is a really excellent example of a lot of this. There is stuff we don't find out until much later in the series that is pretty well foreshadowed. Scene 1.
Yeah.
Badger, I believe you've came across some of it.
Oh yeah, like Gideon is a phenomenal character writing. So for the folks at home, I've read exactly 50% of Gideon the Ninth. I fell off of it because I started writing a lot, and when I'm writing, I find that reading hurts a lot of, like, because I start trying to ape stuff, and I try to like a field of snow, you know. I'm hardcore. Anyway, that's me being sarcastic. But her entirety of her character being like, I'm gonna joke about everything because it hurts too much to take anything seriously, is so well done. Because like throughout the entirety of the first half of the book, there's all these questions of like, hey, why don't you just kill her? Like, and that's like the whole thing of like, I am so intrigued to know the answer, and like I think it like you know, I have my guesses in that like they care very, very deeply for each other. But like the basis of their relationship being Gideon being like, I could snap you like a twig at your weakest moment. In fact, a lot of the writing is built around how good Gideon is at snapping people like twigs and how huge she is and how competent she is in terms of combat. But she doesn't. All she does is hurt her with words. And it's like, this is such an interesting character choice that is throughout the entirety of the book. And at no point does Gideon say, I don't attack her because of blank. Like that never happens. Instead, it's just like the author just kind of showing you in little ways that Gideon gives a shit. Even though Gideon says outright, I don't give a shit. And that's so well done. Like, so well done.
There's a quote I would use, but that would be the third time it has used up my singular F-bomb allotment for an episode.
Do you want me to read it? No, I'm kidding. We'll distribute the wealth a little bit here.
As we're coming to like the end, I just want to give a big shout out to some of my favorite manga and anime protagonists. So there's Thorfinn from Vinland Saga. I think it's a great character journey. And
man.
It's such a fantastic story. I saw the first episode of season 2 when it came out, and I decided I'm going to read the entire manga. And I caught up. And I thought that story is just amazing. Other ones would be Senku from Dr. Stone. I'm not spoiling myself, but I've loved 2 seasons and a special I've watched. One of my favorite Senku things is he was asked a philosophy question of you, your best friend, and your lover in a car crash, who do you save? And he said, I'd find a way to save everyone. And that's his character completely. And finally, Denji from Chainsaw Man. When every woman you meet wants to kill you.
The relatable story.
I can see why Hounds likes it.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Oh.
Do we have anything in the mailbag, Ian?
Not yet. If you have anything that you would like us to talk about or read, you can give us an email at fanfictapes@gmail.com. I believe we also have a Twitter, Maya?
Yes, at fanfictiontapes on Twitter. Also, if you use the hashtag #thefanfictiontapes when responding to something like the prompt I'm about to give in 30 seconds or so, we might read that, and if we like it, we'll feature it on the show.
So what is that prompt?
The prompt is a little bit of a treat for me. Tell us a story with a villain protagonist.
Ooh.
You know, it's up to you to figure out why they're the villain and what makes them someone we want to follow. Why are they driving the story? But just kind of a bit of a prompt and a challenge, because I know a lot of people tend to write protagonists that are more classically heroes.
Nice. Well, if you write anything with that, yeah, send it to us on Twitter or on our Gmail account. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you listen to us there. That, I think, is our word count for this week.
I do have one more thing.
Oh, Dylan, go ahead.
So Maya, continuing on from last week, I want to confront Badger. Maya won't tell me. Maya has told me.
I was gonna lead with this. I'm so sorry, Dylan.
Maya has told me that my name, Dylan, has some infamy in the arcane community. What do you have to do with this?
I did it. I'm the one who started it. So, hey, Dylan, I'm sorry for any Arcane fandom readers who throw unneeded hate on your name. I was going to do this in the intro, but I forgot. So the character of Dylan I sat down to write a fan fiction, and I was like, I need a name for a villain. What name for this villain can I come up with? And then my monkey brain went Dylan, because it rhymes with villain. And that started a revolution of a bunch of fanfic authors who like my stuff and were like, can I use your Dylan in my fic as a villain? And I thought to myself, okay. And so I was like, yeah, sure. You know what? Dylan is open access. Anyone can access Dylan. And so that has resulted in the Dylan bracket League of Legends close bracket tag on AO3. Dylan is not a League of Legends character, but boy howdy did that spiral out of control. So now that I've actually met a Dylan, I am sorry for everything I've done. I can't stop it at this point. It's over. But yeah, my bad.
You have to repair the reputation of my name.
Apparently,
Repent.
I just finished writing a thing about Dylan being another villain. I'll fix it somehow. I'll fix it.
You will.
Maybe you can write a villain protagonist story this week starring Dylan.
Maybe I can do that. Dylan the person, not even the name.
And that reminds me, Badger, where can people find you and your work on the internet?
So you can find me on Twitter at The Homely Badger. You can also find me on AO3 under the same name, The Homely Badger. If you like lesbians punching things, that's my bread and butter. If you don't like that, well, there's not a lot of other stuff. So, rip, I guess.
You can see why I like his writing.
Yes. All right. Well, we're about out of time. So, I have been Ian.
I have been Maya.
I have been Dylan.
And I've been sorry. So sorry.
All right, that's it. Bye.